life, aren't they? Anything could happen. I mean, you've had a dramatic season as well on Game of Thrones.
Yeah.
How have you felt about what's happened with Barristan this season?
Well, it's great, first of all, that he's back. It's great to be back in a series where so many people don't come back, you know, but what his future, what everybody's future will be, of course, is yet to be known. And who knows, you know, how long before we get our act together and manage to get back to Westeros. But, you know, we're currently making our way through Essos, and we'll see where we end up.
If you had to have a dramatic exit, a stage death, how would you like to go out?
Who knows? I might make it through to being what I once was, being again what I once was, which is commander of the Kingsguard, but back in Westeros.
Are you fucking kidding me?
Good evening, Macabros, and welcome to episode 16 of Game of Thrones Rewrite. Today we discuss the man who proves that being geriatric and a badass aren't mutually exclusive, Barristan Selmy. Now, Barristan is plenty baller in the show, particularly due to Ian McElhaney's brilliant performance, but he's even more so in the book. So let me give a rundown of Barristan's history as outlined in the source material. As one of the most famous and well-respected knights in the land, Barristan the Bold truly solidified his status as one of the bravest men in Westeros history during the War of the Ninepenny Kings. Those of you who tuned into Varys' episode may remember when I discussed the numerous Blackfire rebellions. The War of the Ninepenny Kings was the fifth and last of said rebellions. While this conflict saw several notable players of the series making their bones, such as Tywin Lannister and the Blackfish, it was Barristan who came out as the undisputed champ. It was he who carved the path through the Golden Company and killed Maelys, the monstrous Blackfire, ending the Blackfire line in its entirety, or so it was presumed. Barristan was soon named to the Kingsguard of Jaehaerys Targaryen II, and would later serve beneath the Mad King. Despite the madness that was slowly corroding Aerys' mind, Barristan nonetheless stuck to his duty and served him valiantly. Barristan even fought against those who took up arms against his king during Robert's Rebellion. Robert Baratheon would go on to pardon Barristan following his acquisition of the Iron Throne, and make him Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, a position that was later stripped from him by Joffrey Baratheon. Following his dismissal from the court, Barristan travels across the Narrow Sea and meets up with Illyrio, who tells him of Daenerys Targaryen's intent to return to Westeros and take the Iron Throne. Barristan begins serving Dany under the identity of Arstan Whitebeard, keeping his true identity secret in order to ensure that Daenerys does not show signs of Targaryen madness. Barristan eventually reveals his true identity and offers his sword to Dany, who makes him Lord Commander of her Queensguard. So as you can see, Barristan's arc in the book is almost identical to his arc in the show, at least through the first 4 seasons. But then halfway through season 5...
This is bullshit!
So, spoiler alert, but as I am sure most of you already know, Barristan sure as shit does not die in the books. Barristan is still alive and actually becomes a POV character in A Dance with Dragons, after Daenerys flees from Meereen on the back of Drogon. Through Barristan's POV, we are able to stay up to date with the ongoings of Meereen. Though up until this point, he has been hailed as one of the most honorable and iron-willed men in the land, his POV chapters give insight into the mind of Barristan, and the regret and sorrow that a life of dutiful service can bring. In these chapters, Barristan recalls a number of events from his past, and how he imagines things could have turned out differently. During the tourney at Harrenhal, Barristan recalls being unhorsed in the joust by Rhaegar Targaryen. Rhaegar wins the tournament and goes on to crown Lyanna Stark as Queen of Love and Beauty, rather than his wife, Elia Martell, which of course sets the stage for Robert's Rebellion. Barristan ponders, had he defeated Rhaegar in the joust and won the tournament himself, if he could have prevented the destruction that soon followed. He also notes that if he had won the tournament, he would have crowned Ashura Dane, sister of Arthur, as Queen of Love and Beauty, and that his failure to do so led him to never speak of his love for her, which he considers one of his greatest regrets. Do not be mistaken, this insight into Barristan's mind in no way diminishes his character. Quite the opposite, actually. Seeing the insurmountable toll that his service has taken on him only makes his unwavering devotion and loyalty even more of a sign of discipline and courage, while simultaneously revealing Barristan as a well-rounded and fully realized human being. But fuck that complexity noise. We don't get any of that because he gets shanked by a few street punks in Season 5. As for why the Ryers decided to kill him off, since they end up having Tyrion basically take Barristan's place as both Dany's closest confidant, but also the one who stays put in Meereen and deals with the siege of the slavers, it seems they just need to get him out of the way. But I don't really understand their thought process here. Why not just keep Barristan alive and have him stay in Meereen with Tyrion until Dany returns and then follow her back to Westeros? I think the Ryers just didn't know what to do with Barristan since the Meereen plot from the book is scaled down heavily in the show, and they moved up when Tyrion meets Dany. It was a dumb decision to say the least, and it was sad to see the great Ian McElhinney have his heart broken upon learning that he was to be killed off, especially since he had read the books and fully expected to continue his role indefinitely.
I was gutted because, a number of you, I'm sure, have read the books, and I've read the books, and I had reason to expect, I've got a journey here. In fact, if I'm honest, I thought, I'm really looking forward to this season because I'm going to have more to do. I'm going to get my teeth into something I'm really looking forward to.
Now, obviously for our rewrite, we are not going to kill Barristan, because fuck that shit. Barristan is going to stay alive through Season 5 and beyond. Obviously, we have to deal with how this is all going to work with the changes we've already made, but right away, I think a number of you may have already sensed a problem with Barristan staying alive through the later seasons, a problem I touched upon in Jorah's episode. Since we are going with a darker version of Dany, with her bloodlust becoming apparent as early as Season 5, we have to deal with certain characters realizing this and acting accordingly. We have solved this problem with Tyrion, since Tyrion is actively goading Dany on to head to KL and set Cersei alight. We solved this problem with Varys, with him realizing Tyrion is pushing Dany closer to the edge and trying to bring her back, but ultimately betraying her after realizing she is too far gone. And we solved this problem with Jorah by having his interaction with Dany be limited throughout the later seasons. But how can we solve this problem with Barristan? Barristan served beneath the Mad King. He knows the horrific consequences of what can happen when Targ madness seeps its way into the mind of a monarch. Hell, the only reason Barristan took Robb Baratheon's pardon at the end of Robert's Rebellion, rather than seeking out Viserys Targaryen, was because even at a young age, Viserys was showing signs of said madness. Barristan, not wanting a repeat of recent events, decided to not take a chance on him. This is also why he kept his identity secret from Dany until he could assure that she was not in fact CBP. But since we are ultimately having Dany being driven to the edge, how can Barristan stay by her side for so long? Given his past trauma of seeing what happened under her father's rule, Barristan would probably dip as soon as Dany started to show the slightest sign of going mad. Come to think of it, how is the book going to handle this? Since it is very probable that Dany will end up torching King's Landing after letting her Eye of the Dragon side take over, what is going to happen to Barristan? If Barristan does not die soon in the books, how could Barristan stay loyal to Dany all the way up until she gets to King's Landing? I mean, come on, what other option is there? It's not like he would ever betray Dany, right? A true knight like him? He would never take up arms against the one he has sworn his service to, right?
Oh, yeah, no, you know what? No, yeah.
Yeah, this is why I said this episode may be quite controversial. There is a very probable chance that Barristan will at some point end up betraying, or at the very least forsaking, Dany. But wait, isn't this insanely out of character for him, given his fierce loyalty to every monarch he has served in the past? Well, no, not at all. As stated in Barristan's POV chapters, we learn of the numerous regrets he holds as a result of his lifetime of service, all of which have taught him a crucial lesson. Unquestionable loyalty can, in some cases, lead to dire consequences. This turmoil within Barristan is demonstrated no better than when he recalls his role in perhaps the most pivotal and consequential event in the history of the land, the Defiance of Duskendale. During the reign of the Mad King, Dennis Darkland served as the Lord of Duskendale, which was a port town located just northeast of King's Landing. Duskendale had once been one of the wealthiest ports in the land, but saw a decline as King's Landing began taking in most of its traffic. Darkland petitioned the crown for a charter, but was refused by Tywin Lannister. Enraged, Lord Darkland made what is perhaps the most cataclysmic decision in Westerosian history. Lord Darkland stopped paying his taxes. Knowing it was only a matter of time until the Westerosi IRS came a-knockin', Darkland invited the Mad King to Duskendale to discuss how he could rectify the situation. Tywin told Aerys it was probably a bad idea, but Aerys basically told him to go fuck himself, seeing as the relationship between the two men was already disintegrating by this point, but we'll discuss that another time. Anyway, in order to show Tywin who was boss, Aerys decided to travel to Duskendale and settle the dispute on his own. Well, this ended up being a horrendously bad decision, as the moment Aerys stepped foot into town, he was kidnapped and imprisoned. Tywin soon laid siege to the town, and a standoff began. Now, there are many theories surrounding this whole debacle. Some theorize that after Aerys was captured, Tywin began working behind the scenes to ensure that Aerys never left Duskendale alive, so that his heir, Rhaegar Targaryen, could take the throne. Perhaps Tywin's eventual decision to storm the castle, rather than reach a peace agreement, was intended to bring about Aerys' death. Another theory claims that Tywin actually worked with Lord Darkland to put this whole scheme together with the intent to get rid of Aerys. There are a number of other theories as to what led Lord Darkland to kidnap Aerys, including his wife manipulating him, or that he is simply a fucking idiot. Some more likely than others, but I digress. Anyway, Tywin refused to settle with Lord Darkland, and instead threatened to storm the castle and kill all inside if Aerys was not released. Now, whether Tywin wanted Aerys to be killed as the breach of the castle commenced, or perhaps he truly intended to get him out of there alive, well, in any case, the storming of the castle never took place. Why? Because motherfucking badass Barristan balls of steel bold as brass Selmy. Realizing that a storming of the castle would surely result in Aerys being killed, Barristan took matters into his own hands. This beautiful son of a bitch went full-on Metal Gear Selmy, snuck into the castle, disguised himself as a beggar, found Aerys and busted his crazy Targas out of the dungeon, and as they were escaping, Barristan was even able to avenge a fellow member of the Kingsguard who was killed when Aerys was initially taken prisoner, gutting the motherfucker on his way out. Barristan took a fucking arrow to the chest during the escape, but nonetheless was successful in saving his king. Absolute unit.
I don't know what you heard about me.
Left without leverage, Lord Darkland surrendered and the conflict was settled. Happy ending, right?
No.
While he was shown to have some psychotic tendencies before this event, Aerys' captivity was the straw that broke the camel's back. Instead of merely punishing those responsible for his captivity, Aerys went absolutely ballistic, obliterating Darkland's entire house from the earth, executing them in terrifying and painful ways. He even decimated House Hollard for their friendly association with House Darkland, the lone survivor of said rampage being our favorite fool, Dantos Hollard, who was spared at Barristan's request. The one who got out the worst, however, was Lord Darkland's wife, Lady Sorella, who had her quote-unquote womanly parts torn out and was burned alive. After this event, Aerys was never the same. He was convinced that both Tywin and Rhaegar had orchestrated the Defiance in order to remove him from the throne. Again, some theorize that Tywin did have a hand in orchestrating this conflict, but Aerys' suspicion was clearly as a result of his delusional insanity. Aerys' madness eventually led him to ruin after he executed Rickard and Brandon Stark, thus setting off the events of Robert's Rebellion. And thus, Barristan's successful rescue mission is what led to Aerys' reign of madness. Had Barristan gone along with Tywin's plan to storm the castle, Aerys most likely would have been killed, and Rhaegar would have taken the throne, leading to a peaceful and righteous reign. Perhaps if Barristan had allowed himself to put aside his duty, countless lives could have been saved, a thought that has plagued his conscience ever since. And therefore, those who would like to see Barristan be loyal to Dany all the way to the end, I may have some bad news for you. Remember, the last we see of Dany in the books is her being taken captive by Khal Draco. And as we have discussed and given evidence in the actual events of the show, it is likely that when Dany returns to Meereen, she will not rely on diplomacy to settle the siege of the city. And thus, Dany's captivity by Khal Draco may in some way be a parallel to Aerys being held captive during the Defiance. During her captivity, perhaps Dany, rendered powerless and humiliated by her captors, will decide to never let hesitation or mercy allow her to end up in this position again. In the show, it seems like the writers wanted to communicate that Season 6 was about Dany returning to her roots and saying to hell with diplomacy. I don't think they communicated this well enough, but considering how she deals with the Khals and later the Meereen slavers, it seems like the theory that Dany will start to go full-on CBP in the Winds of Winter may in fact come to pass. And that is basically what we are doing for our rewrite. Having Tyrion arrive and start to turn Dany to the dark side towards the end of Season 5, and then having Dany being kidnapped and humiliated at the hands of Khal Draco is enough to push Dany over the edge and have her realize that Tyrion is right. Diplomacy is a lie, and those who appear to be civil will turn on you the moment an opportunity presents itself. So we know how Tyrion and Varys will react to this, with Tyrion goading her on, but coming to his senses towards the end of Season 7, though the damage will be more than done at this point, and Varys trying to keep Dany on the straight and narrow before realizing she is too far gone, and thus trying to take her out, but failing and being executed himself. But what are we going to do at Barristan? Once he realizes that Dany may be heading to the dark side, how will he react? I could buy Varys trying his best to bring Dany over to the side of good and giving her the benefit of the doubt all the way up until Season 8. But Barristan has had first-hand experience in what happens when you let Targaryen madness go unchecked. Given the horror that came about due to his intervention during the Defiance of Duskendale, do you really think Barristan will give Dany the BOTD? Or do you think as soon as she starts to show signs of CBP that he won't take the same chance as he did with Aerys? So what would this entail? Would Barristan leave Dany? Forsake her? Well, for those of you who have read the book, or who tuned into Varys' episode, the answer is quite obvious. The most likely theory is that after arriving in Westeros, and after seeing that Fagon has already besieged, or perhaps even taken King's Landing, Dany will say enough is enough. Rather than marrying Fagon and creating a Targaryen union, Dany will refuse to bend the knee and set out to take the throne for herself. This will most likely lead to her losing the support of the Northerners and being castigated by the people of King's Landing, who have been told by Fagon that she is a tyrant who plans to kill them all. Again, not really sure where they would get that idea. Varys will most likely forsake Dany in favor of Fagon, and thus Barristan most likely will as well. During the Defiance of Duskendale, had Barristan allowed Aerys to die, Rhaegar would have ascended to the throne. If Barristan feels that Dany may be going off the deep end and won't agree to sharing the throne, he may forsake her for Fagon. Hell, even if Dany isn't showing signs of madness by this point in the books, though she most likely will, do you really think Barristan would side with the daughter of the Mad King over the son of his close friend, the magnanimous Rhaegar Targaryen? Whether or not Fagon is actually who he says he is irrelevant. It's about who Barristan believes he is. The books will more than likely see Barristan side with Fagon, and either being executed by Dany for his betrayal, or killed during the burning of King's Landing. This also should be interesting since, if it does come to light that Fagon is in fact a Blackfyre, Barristan was the one who fought against him in the War of the Ninepenny Kings, and obliterated the Blackfyre line, or so everyone thought at the time. However, as we all know, Fagon is not in the show, and the idea that Barristan would side with Cersei and Euron over Dany, regardless of her going CBP, is absurd. So how are we going to reconcile this? How are we going to handle Barristan realizing that Dany is turning to the dark side? As I said, it may be quite controversial, but let's get to it. For our rewrite, we will see Barristan survive his encounter with the Sons of the Harpy in Season 5, or we'll just cut it all together, and he will continue to serve by Dany's side, and thus he will be with her when Jorah and Tyrion arrive. Jorah will of course be banished again, and Tyrion will begin his attempt at pushing her closer to the edge. Barristan counsels Dany, telling her of the atrocities her father committed, and urges her to remain on her path of diplomacy. At this point in the story, Dany will agree with this sentiment, but it's not going to last long. Barristan will remain a Marine after Dany flees the city on the back of Drogon, and is taken captive by Khal Draco. Per Varys' episode, Season 6 will see Varys arriving in Meereen and meeting back up with Tyrion. Together they will try to keep order in Meereen during Dany's absence, though their methods of course could not be more different, with Varys trying to use compromise, while Tyrion is quick to resort to a more iron fist approach. During this time, we will see Barristan begin to buddy up to Varys, as he suspects that Tyrion may be trying to bring out Dany's bloodlust. What I love about this is that the relationship between Varys and Barristan isn't exactly all that peachy. As I mentioned in Varys' episode, Barristan holds Varys responsible for exacerbating the madness of Aerys, so it's safe to say that Barristan is not the biggest fan of the Spider. However, Varys most likely holds Barristan in high regard. It is even implied that Varys suggested to Joffrey and Cersei to remove Barristan from the Kingsguard, with the ultimate intent of Barristan eventually buddying up with Dany. As I stated before, the only reason Barristan did not end up traveling to and supporting Viserys Targaryen was due to his already evident madness. But since Barristan was dismissed from the court after Viserys' death, it isn't ridiculous to assume that Varys assumed, or at least hoped, that Barristan would seek her out. I would love to see these interactions between Barristan and Varys take place. Perhaps Varys will reveal that, in an attempt to secure Rhaegar's acquisition of the throne, he was trying to drive Aerys to the edge, or maybe even that he had some hand in the Defiance of Duskendale. Take that with a grain of salt, that is a very contested theory. And that Barristan's devotion to his duty ruined his plans. Perhaps Varys may begin to convince Barristan that blindly following your duty is not always the best or most righteous thing one can do, and that sometimes protecting the realm means protecting it from the very person you have sworn yourself to. In any case, Season 6 will see Barristan and Varys create a trepid alliance. Barristan doesn't trust Tyrion in the slightest, but Varys seems to be a bit more optimistic, believing that Tyrion is still the good-hearted man he knew in Westeros. But by the end of the season, Varys realizes that the softer side of Tyrion is gone, and he plans to use Dany to take his revenge on the people of King's Landing. Things get even worse when Dany arrives back in Meereen and takes care of the slavers in a swift and brutal fashion. It is at this moment that Varys realizes that Barristan was correct, and Tyrion has already partially succeeded in pushing Dany to the edge. As Dany and co travel to Westeros, Barristan and Varys come to a truce, to prevent Tyrion from poisoning Dany's mind, ironically the same thing that Barristan had once condemned Varys for doing to Aerys. Season 7 sees the game of wits between Varys and Tyrion beginning. By the midpoint of the series, Tyrion has succeeded, through his sabotaging of Varys' military plans, in widening the rift between Dany and Varys, thus resulting in Varys being disinvited from the barbecue. Barristan will also see a rift form between him and Dany, as Tyrion has worked to turn her against Barristan and supplant him as her number one. Both finding themselves removed from Dany's inner circle, Varys and Barristan plan their next move. Barristan offers to kill Tyrion in order to stop him from poisoning Dany's mind, but Varys fears that doing so will only cause Dany to become paranoid about the loyalty of her advisors, and may send her on a downward spiral. In lieu of Barristan's idea, Varys begins to buddy up to Jon Snow, using him as a countermeasure against Tyrion, and he is successful. The relationship between Dany and Jon results in Dany rekindling the magnanimous side of her, which in turn leads to her trying to settle with Cersei on peaceful terms. Per Varys' video, Tyrion will then meet with Cersei after the meeting in the Dragon Pit, and after discovering that she is pregnant, begin to have a change of heart. At this point, everything seems great. Dany and Cersei will defeat the White Walkers together and, due to their cooperation, Varys and Barristan believe that they will, in the end, come to peaceful terms. Well, all of that goes to shit in episode 2 of season 8 when Jaime arrives and warns Dany that Cersei has no intention of sending forces to help against the Night King. Side note, in Varys' episode we had Cersei tell Tyrion that she wasn't sending forces to help them against the White Walkers, but as many point out in the comments, there really is no reason that she would do so. So we will just have Tyrion discover this fact when Jaime arrives, just like everyone else does. The revelation that Cersei will not be sending forces to help the North is finally what makes Dany swear off diplomacy. As Tyrion told her at the end of season 5, if you trust your enemies to be civil, it will bite you in the ass. Dany decided to trust Cersei, and had Jaime not arrived and told him of her betrayal, there is a good chance that the North would have been left with their pants down while the White Walkers ripped them a new asshole. It is at this moment that Tyrion, Barristan, and Varys all realize that it's too late. All the poison that Tyrion has been pumping into Dany's mind has pushed her over the edge, and there is no turning back. They know that even if they defeat the White Walkers, Dany will burn Cersei to a crisp, and her reign may not be a peaceful one. The situation only grows worse when Jon tells Dany of his true parentage. This creates a rift between Jon and Dany, and results in Dany becoming paranoid about Jon double-crossing her, very akin to Aerys suspecting that his own son Rhaegar was planning to take the throne for himself. Per Varys' episode, one of Varys' little birds overhears Jon's confession and relays to Varys. Varys tries to convince Jon to reveal his identity and take the throne himself, but Jon refuses. Now in Varys' episode, we set up a scenario where a spy of Dany's overhears the meeting between Varys and Jon, and this is what leads her to execute him. But how about this? After failing to convince Jon to betray Dany, Varys meets with Barristan and informs him of their current situation. There is a possibility that Jon may inform Dany of Varys' attempt to overthrow her, and thus they are running out of time. And now we see Barristan put in the same position he may end up in the books. Will Barristan betray the queen he has pledged himself to in order to support the son of Rhaegar Targaryen, or will Barristan stick to his duty and support his queen, even if it leads to horror? But as evident in the book, since Barristan doesn't seem like the sort of man to make the same mistake twice, Barristan makes his decision to ensure Jon's position on the Iron Throne by forsaking his sworn oath and assassinating Dany. I told you this was going to be controversial. Can't wait to see what you all think of the comments, but for me, I think it actually works well, as given his characterization in the books, it seems like Barristan is destined to become a semi-tragic character. On the eve of Dany's assault on King's Landing, Dany is holed up in Dragonstone, her paranoia resulting in her barricading herself in the castle, with Unsullied all around. And just as he did during the Defiance of Duskendale, Barristan sets out on a solo mission to kill his own queen. Barristan sneaks into the castle, killing any that stand in his way, his conscience weighing on him as he plans to do the one thing he had sworn to never do. A man whose whole life was built around the idea of honoring your king and queen no matter what, now realizing that life simply isn't that simple. Barristan makes his way to Dany's quarters and finds her alone. Dany stands, looking at her hand, the commander of her Kingsguard, as he prepares to take her life. Barristan approaches Dany, sword drawn, ready to deliver the killing blow. But he hesitates. He knows what he must do, but his lifetime of sticking to his duty makes him take pause. Despite knowing this is the only way to ensure peace, he realizes he has become the very evil he has fought against, the killer of a child, similar to the likes of Gregor Clegane killing the children of Rhaegar and Elia, or Cersei Lannister demanding the deaths of Robert Baratheon's bastards. Barristan knows what he must do, but the turmoil within his mind makes him hesitate. And that's all it takes, because as he raises his sword, closing his eyes, preparing to deliver the killing blow, a spear is driven through his heart. Barristan falls to his knees, revealing Grey Worm behind him. Barristan and Dany lock eyes, an expression of complete and utter betrayal on Dany's face, as Barristan falls to the floor. Barristan Selmy, a man who spent his life sticking to his duty, regardless of the horrific consequences, realized that following your duty and doing the right thing are not always synonymous. And yet it was that very dissonance that led to him hesitating, just long enough to be killed. Had Barristan killed Dany with the same no questions asked attitude, Perhaps he could have prevented the inevitable massacre that will soon follow. The next day, Dany is more paranoid than ever. She holds court and demands to know who else is conspiring against her. She even accuses Jon Snow of trying to usurp her. But it is then that Varys comes forth and admits his culpability in the assassination attempt. This, of course, leads to Dany condemning Varys to death. But per his episode, as he is being led to his death, Varys asks Tyrion to finish the job that Barristan set out to do, and kill Dany to ensure peace for the Seven Kingdoms. And he does just that by the end of the series, ensuring that Jon Snow will sit on the throne and bring peace to the land. And that will wrap up this episode, everybody. Holy shit, this one was harder to read than it was to write. I have a feeling this will be a very contentious end for Barristan. I really think it works thematically, but given how much of a fan favorite he is, I imagine him dying like this may piss a few people off, especially if you haven't read the books and are not aware of some of the more in-depth characterization he has been given. Then again, could it be any worse than his fate in the show? Let me know what you think in the comments. Next episode, we are going to take a stab at Badass Bronn to rectify his absolutely abysmal treatment in Season 8, which basically backtracks on all of the character development he was given throughout the show. As you can see, since we are getting closer to the end of the series, the rewrites themselves will be somewhat shorter and less thorough since we aren't dealing with the most essential players here, with the exception of the Bran the Night King video, which I am saving for the last episode before the big finale. That one will most likely be a doozy. Less content, but because of this, I should be able to get them out to you guys faster than I usually do. Thanks for tuning in. Subscribe to me if you haven't already. Consider supporting me on Patreon, and I'll see you next time.